Okay, I'd just like to talk a little bit more and perhaps a little bit more coherently than yesterday about lactase persistence and its evolution in human beings. This is a map showing the concentration of lactase persistence in the old world among the human population. So as we can see, it's highest in North and Northwest Europe, where it's around 80% or more of people who can digest lactase into adulthood. It's also fairly high, around sort of 50-60% by the looks of it, in East Africa and Arabia and the Middle East, into sort of North and Northwest India, that sort of area, and also in West Africa. And then it's much lower in sort of Central, Southern Europe, Asia, Australia, and so on. So that suggests that there are populations that have come to settle there that found quite early on in human history that there was some advantage to dairy farming. Those are the people that have survived. Those are the people that have reproduced. Hence, the genetic mutation that first allowed for lactase persistence is more dominant in those areas. Just a few words on what lactase persistence actually is. This is Wikipedia, the fount of all human wisdom, completely infallible, as we know. And it just tells us that lactase persistence is the continued activity of the lactase enzyme into adulthood. Lactase is the enzyme, and lactose is the sugar that's in milk. Lactase is an enzyme that's already present in the human digestive system, and that's what breaks down the lactose sugar and allows us to digest it. As we stop drinking milk, as our mothers wean us off their own milk, this enzyme becomes inactive, and if we try and drink milk as adults, we may well find that we're not able to digest it, and that's what lactase intolerance is. And about 2/3 of the human population in the world today are still lactose intolerant. We can just see it's much more heavily concentrated in some areas than in others. So Asians, particularly East Asians, Southern Africans, generally are less tolerant of lactose than some Northern Europeans and some other Africans in the West. I don't know about America, but obviously that will be, I imagine, more complex, considering the history of human spread across the planet. Anyway, when we think about dairy farming and the evolution of the development, rather, of civilization, this is an example of something called human niche construction, and that's the process by which organisms construct important components of their local environment in ways that introduce novel selection pressures. What that means is you have a co-evolution both of culture, of civilization, of technology, if you like, primitive technology, and biological evolution. So, according to Mark Thomas, who is a professor, I believe, at UCL at the moment, who's studied this in quite a lot of detail, obviously, as he tells us that from his studies we can see that the lactase persistence mutation becomes an evolutionary advantage at the point at which dairy farming develops, and therefore leads to the spread of dairy farming. There's also another interesting study called Milk and Molecules: Secrets from Prehistoric Pottery. This is available online, as is this other article that I just linked to. I'll put some links in the description below. And this study was in Ireland, I believe. Yeah, Ireland. There we go. And they were studying pottery and the remains of milk fats in the pottery that was used by people um, around 7,000 BC who settled in Ireland. And what they concluded from this study, I think this was at the University of Bristol. Where are we now? Here we go. The results of organic residue analysis from the sites that they studied in Ireland suggests evidence for dairy farming around the start of the 4th millennium BC. So we're talking 6,000, 7,000 years ago. And that tells us that some of the first farming communities on the island were already involved in milking their livestock and processing those products in pots, which means that dairy farming was not a practice discovered or developed at a later, more advanced stage of agricultural development, which some people have previously thought, but is something they already brought with them. When they moved north from Europe and Africa, wherever they came from, they had already developed these techniques. And it mentions challenges that would have included keeping livestock unstressed and alive during sea crossings. So they were bringing their animals with them. And that obviously suggests quite a strong interdependence between them and animals in order to survive as they meet the challenges of a new environment. All very interesting stuff.